Okay. Now we're recording. Now we're good to go. Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to have such a nice crowd on a Thursday afternoon. Yeah, today's Thursday. It's hard to tell right now what day it is, what day of the week it is. But we're here, and I'm happy to have everybody around. Once again, a quick reminder for everyone in the crowd, let's keep our microphones off until we get to the Q&A section of the webinar. So this webinar, I titled it, My Home Desk is My New Classroom, Transitioning from Schools to Remote and Virtual Teaching. First, I'll be remiss not to say thank you to ASOCOPI for the opportunity to let me share some of the thoughts and ideas that have been percolating on my mind for the last few months since this whole thing started. I also got to give extra credit to my research team and my research lab at the Literacy and Second Languages Project, what we call the Legion, the ASOCOPI Legion, because some of the ideas that I'm going to share with you today are also the result of our own research and our own efforts. And of course, a lot of respect to all teachers around the world, all teachers in Colombia, in urban and rural areas, from north to south, from east to west, from every region, because of your hard work, your commitment. You are still making a difference in your students' lives. You have continued to be beacons of care and proximity in the middle of all the physical distancing. Because right, I don't think we have social distancing right now. We have a lot of social distancing. What we have is physical distancing because of the circumstances. And of course, remember all the regulations, social distancing, cover your mouth, wear the masks, etc., etc., etc. So let's just quickly get something out of the way. Yes, this isn't normal. We already know that. We have talked about it. We have discussed. We can move on. And now let's start facing the challenge. It's making the situation more tenable and grounded in our reality. So the invitation in this webinar is to stop shaming people back and forth for what things we're doing or we don't know, or the things we can't do, or the things we're not doing. This is not about shaming anymore. This is about creating from the things we know and from the things we can do, and offering ways to support each other and learn together in order to survive and thrive, but survive and thrive as a community. We can only do this together. And that is one of the key elements I'm going to be discussing throughout the presentation. Understand that we have to start accepting this likely scenario that at some point, for a short or a longer period of time, teaching is going to be from home. And the idea is to present a kind of a framework to carry out the learning and teaching processes that are about to happen, emphasizing a minimalist approach where you can grow and improve. Sometimes we try to do too much, and sometimes it's better to start from a minimalist approach into this. And share some basic resources, again, with the idea that we are together working this, that we are doing this together, that we are collaborating, etc., etc. So there are 4 points in the agenda. First of all, a quick walk through some of the terms and definitions. So I'd like to say, how can we navigate this if we don't know what this is? After we really clarify the terms and we have some understanding of what we're talking about, I'm going to propose borrowing the idea of the triage that is so common in the medical emergency lingo, and bring that triage into remote and virtual learning teaching. Then some considerations as you get ready or you continue to get ready. And then we'll go into some instructional practices and resources that I'm going to recommend. Some of them I'm already doing them myself. Some I've seen people doing them and successfully implementing them. So I always like to start by pointing out that if you don't have clarity in the terminology, it's difficult to get things moving. So I'm just going to quickly gloss over some of the key terms and definitions that have been rolling in the past few days. And once again, a friendly reminder to everybody in the crowd to keep the microphones off for at least this first part of the presentation. We still got a little bit of background noise coming from somewhere. And I will apologize beforehand because at some point, yeah, I know I can do it myself, but it's difficult to do that when I'm also trying to keep an eye on the PowerPoint slides. So let us begin with some of these terms and these definitions that we have in this particular conversation. I think everybody seems to be muted, and so we're in business. All right, so let's begin to look at some of these terms, because it's important. There are a lot of terms circling, and I hear people talking about remote, distance, online, virtual, hybrid, blended, and I don't know you, but when there are so many terms in the air, it's not abnormal to get confused and get a little bit lost in the middle of that. So let's look at the first one. So the first one is this idea of emergency remote teaching. So this is what has happened so far. We just kind of have to disrupt what we were doing, disrupt our delivery, our instructional practices in order to attend to an emergency. Ideally, we should go back to whatever we had before this happened. Is just that right now, we don't even know how soon that is going to happen. So from that perspective, what we have is just temporary solutions in order not to disrupt things a little too much. Then we have something called remote or distance learning, where we are already establishing home, you're in a different city, you're in a different neighborhood, you're in a different country. We don't have to be the same time together, and we're going to be using multiple forms of media in order to continue the communication role. Then we have hybrid or blended learning. So this is when we have that move, when you're going to be in a classroom, but also working in online environments, moving back and forth, where we think of, in a tactical sense, how we're going to organize it, and also think about the strategies and the pedagogical devices that we're going to bring in order to make this happen. And then we have digital and online learning. So that's when we start using digital and web-based technologies, so you can be away from campus and still participate in the activities as pretty much as if you were. And then you have virtual learning, where we kind of rely on these online and digital environments to create classroom spaces or non-traditional classroom spaces where we can promote multiple layers of interaction. So with that, where are we right now? Right now, we are here. We are here in the space of emergency remote teaching. So we had to move home, and we have to do it in a hurry in order to conduct our educational practices. But what's going to happen is we have to start thinking beyond emergency remote teaching. And we need to start thinking beyond ERT, because we have to think of sustainable learning practices. One of the realities is, if we stay in this emergency mode, that is unsustainable. It's impossible, because we don't have the stamina, we don't have the mental capacity to be in an emergency mode for 6 more months, for 1 year, for 2 years. And when you have estimations, and you already heard the news that Cambridge University is already considering not going back into campus instruction until 2021 or even 22, as a report from Harvard recently indicated, we have to think long-term. Like, we have to think, because there's my dogs making their usual appearance, Connor and Duncan MacLeod. Do we have to think about thriving and succeeding? That it's in everybody's best interest that we have to start thinking of these short and long-term strategies. And that's kind of like the mindset where I'm hoping this webinar will lead us to, that we need to start moving past the emergency status and start thinking together collectively. And this collectively means schools of education, it means private universities, public schools, private schools, anybody from the K-20, on the P-20 spectrum, the ministers and secretaries of education, research groups that are doing this kind of work, that we all have to work together into the sustainability of the model that we're going to have for the next 2-3 years, and maybe even for the rest of this decade. That we have to start thinking, yes, we have to attend what's going to happen in June and July and August, September, but we have to start thinking way ahead of 2021, 2022, and even 2030, because the landscape of education is going to change as a consequence of what's happening right now. Where it's going to go, well, it is hard to tell. I mean, there are a lot of future scenarios. I've been over the past few months, and specifically over the past few days when I was preparing the webinar, projecting these future scenarios, kind of like, I always like that image by Doctor Strange from Avengers Infinity War, seeing that there are 14,608 scenarios. The good news for us is there is more than one scenario where we win. That is the good news. I mean, in the movie, there was only one scenario where they would win. In this one, there are multiple scenarios where we can all win. But we'll have to commit to working together. So that is where I'm going with this next section of what should we do in the terms of you and your students, what should we do? And I'm proposing this idea of the triage. So again, the definition of triage, this idea of looking at problems in order to decide how we're going to deal with this. Like in the medical emergency context is about, okay, who gets to be in an emergency situation, who gets to be helped first, who gets to be helped second, who gets to be helped last. And as I propose the triage, I want us to think about that this triage model is going to, and I feel trying to find. And as we think about the triage, the idea here is to start thinking who needs more support, who needs less support, and which situations for support might be beyond, let's say, beyond the confine or beyond the domain of professional development. The idea here is, I mean, thinking, as I propose a triage, the idea is to thinking of the best learning that we can provide to our students, to think about teaching conditions that are not going to add up more stress. I mean, we already have, our stress levels are off the charts right now. The last thing we need is to add more. We need to start thinking as we do these practices or as we develop these curricula, we have to lower stress levels. And I cannot stress enough the idea of sustainable practices. That these are things that not only can we use right now, this semester, next semester, but we can start implementing gradually in our different educational institutions across the country. So, but always beginning from one assumption. And this is my firm belief. I'm a teacher educator, and I always begin from this belief. All teachers are committed to making the most out of this. And all the teachers I know are deeply concerned about students and their learning and their well-being. I don't think that any of us is into this and we're not thinking about our students. We're all thinking about our students every day, whether they're preschool students or students taking classes in the doctoral program. Their learning, their well-being it's at the forefront of our work as teachers. And I always operate from that assumption that teachers are giving 150, 200, 300, 1,000% in every situation. So as we continue, I want you to look at this chart right here. And in this chart, I'm proposing two axes. One, I like to call it tech savvy and skills. So basically, how comfortable do you feel with technology? How much technology can you use in your everyday life? How much technology can you use in your instructional practices? What are your skills? You have skills in video editing, video creation, using of different multimodal tools, etc. And then on the other axis, the existence and presence of technical resources. That is the ones you have, the ones that you know are within your grasp. And think about your situation. And again, this is not a quiz, so you don't have to say an answer to anybody, but think about where you are in this particular space. If you were to use the annotation tool and you were to put a dot, where would you put that dot? And again, this is a question for yourselves, not for me. I'm just putting dots randomly, just because I kind of like to play with this little tool. But think about where you would place yourselves.
I know.
Where would you visualize yourselves in this chart? And answer this question again to yourself. Honestly, answer yourself this question. Where are you in relation to your tech savvy, your skills, and the tech resources you have available at your disposal for this situation? I'll sip a little bit of water, and then I'll move to the next slide to talk about what those dots, the big dots, mean. All right, so this is what those dots mean. And I'm going to start with the blue and the black. The black, when you have low tech savvy and low availability resources, this is a case where we have to really plan strategies that don't depend on technology but focus on learning. I am not going to cover this today because, as I said, this is one of those situations where we need something more than just a webinar. We need a full-fledged operation to support these teachers. And this is not the kind of stuff that you can do in just one 60 to 75-minute webinar. This is much, much bigger than this. This is much, much larger than what we're doing here. This is way beyond even the capabilities of ASOCOPI to advocate or intervene. We can even propose, but there are conditions here that are much larger than we are. So obviously bringing this up in the middle of this webinar, no, because probably people who would in that situation are not going to be able to, are not here checking out the webinar. And then I'm going to go to the other end. So you have someone who's high tech savvy and has a lot of resources. If you're this kind of person, and right now I'm going to speak into educational institutions. Right now I'm just going to speak into the educational institutions. This is a very particular case. It's a very special case. When you have a teacher who has a lot of tech savvy and a lot of resources at the disposal, the best thing you can do is let them be creative. Cut them loose. They're not going to disappoint. Let them do their thing and eventually start asking them for advice to help you, to help the people who are in the green square. And help the people who are in the green square. The people in the green square, you are the people for whom this webinar is intended to. This is the people I'm trying to talk today. The people who are here are the people who should be giving webinars at some point. The people here, these are the people that we have to start advocating for in schools of education and research groups so they get what they really need, which is not what's going to happen today. And those are different, those are just two ends of the spectrum. I'm here in the middle, where we have teachers like some of you are teachers who may have high-tech savvy. You may be someone who knows how to play with technology, but maybe there are not a lot of resources in schools, or you don't have a lot of resources of your own. So in this case, I always advocate for a minimalist approach. You have the skills, just don't apply those skills with just lessen down the scale of the resources you're going to use, but you can still do high learning based on your savvy. And then you have people who are not very comfortable with technology, but you have resources. If that's the case, then what we have to do, and again, speaking to the institutions, is provide scaffolding so they don't have to deal with frustration. And you as a teacher, you take a low risk approach, a high risk approach, depending on your confidence. If you're someone who feels confident, you want to experiment with high-end technology, high-end gizmos with video conferencing, video editing, go for it. If you don't feel so comfortable, then use some of the simpler resources available to you. There is no penalty, and right now there's no penalty in whatever you choose. I mean, choose what you can from all the options you may have available. Choose the ones you feel more comfortable with. And later, when we have developed a sustainable plan, you can start thinking, all right, what else can I learn? What else can I add to my repertoire? But the first approach to this is keep it simple and keep it grounded to your reality. And understand this, that regardless of where people are here, regardless of where you are, whether you're a blue dot, a green dot, an orange dot, or a black dot, we have to keep in mind, and this is across the board, that first of all, everybody's going to need technical support. However savvy you are, there's going to be a level of technical support we're going to need. That everybody's going to need academic support. That there has to be academic support from program coordinators, from administrators, and from colleagues. And that the most important level of support we have to offer is emotional and moral support. That sometimes we need to forget about this part. We pay too much attention to the technical stuff, and we forget about the emotional and moral support. This is what teachers need more than ever. And as we provide this can make this work out much faster and more easily. Now, when it comes to the schools, once you decide what you want to do, because as a school you have to make a decision. Are you going to do distance education? Are you going to do hybrid? Are you going to do a virtual model? What are you going to do? Once you decide on that, start a triage. And triage according to teacher savvy and teachers' resources. Understanding that teachers may have to resort to using the resources they have handy and at their disposal, as opposed to whatever the school or institution can provide. Being able to use the other resources, that may come at a later time. But this triage is necessary. We need to assess where everybody is. Because sometimes in the hurry, we have sent everybody to do the same thing. And that's when you have very levels of frustration and very levels of success and failure. And make this move gradual. I mean, I don't see the need to go full virtual unless you already were making plans for that. If your institution was already setting up platforms and was already setting up the structure, then sure, you want to accelerate, speed it up a little bit, not go full fast and furious, but you can accelerate a little bit in order to get in that direction. But whatever move you make, you have to make it gradual to give teachers time to organize their strategies and accommodate. A rash move right now would be fatal for everybody involved. Teachers, students, administration. And we all need to keep that in mind. A rash move right now would not work. So let's begin to set the scene. And this is where we are right now. I just found this little cartoon and I wanted to share it because I can assure that this has been us this semester. You know, the formal outfit and then the shorts, the slippers, or no slippers, and then this work area. So the first thing we have to consider is when we start thinking about the work area we have. I mean, do you have one? Yes, no, maybe. And if you have one, where is it? And start thinking about lighting. Is this an area that is well lit? And think about your chair. Where are you sitting? I mean, if you can afford,
Amor, haga favor y me trae los audífonos.
if you're someone who can afford to have, call it, like a very comfortable, one of those ergonomic chairs, fine. But sometimes we can't do that. Sometimes all we have is the is a stool of the stool in the living room, or sometimes that's all we got. So, but think about where are you sitting and also how you're sitting. I don't have it here, but I promise in the resources, I have found some really interesting videos from professional physical therapists who are talking about that particular, the particular sitting arrangement. And you will have to start keeping things in mind about how you sit, how you lean on, how you recline your back, how you stand, when you're going to standing up, sitting down, even the position of your laptop in relation to your eyes. That's going to be important, especially because as we continue being here, not keeping that in mind is going to add extra layers of stress. Also, start thinking about how many people are using your area. Is it going to be just for you? Is it something you have to share with your partner, with a roommate, with your children? So it's important. And I talk about this setup because one of the things we have to keep in mind as we organize this further is how we organize our schedules in relation not just to the people in our inner circle, but also your academic community. I mean, I consider myself really fortunate in that regard. I really consider very fortunate in that regard because my spouse and I, we have our own resources. We can spread around the apartment. That is not the situation for everybody. So you always need to strategize. And even in the case of when you have your own equipment and you still need to organize your schedules accordingly. Which brings me to another question here. Thinking about your instructional practices, as you're designing what you're going to do, you need to start thinking about what you're going to do based on what you have right now, not on what you wish you had. Again, it's the triage. So think about what technological and digital resources you have right now and start making a mental inventory as I'm talking. Start making a mental inventory of what you have right now at your disposal where you're sitting. What are the technological and digital resources you have? Do you have, what is your router? Do you have the access to Wi-Fi? Do you have access to Ethernet cables? And we'll get to that in a little bit. How about the phone? What kind of phone do you have? Do you have cloud resources? Do you have Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive, etc.? Do you have access to cameras or microphones? What about your laptop? Do you have a laptop? Do you have a desktop? What kind of laptop? What kind of desktop it is? What kind of apps and what kind of software do you have at your disposal that you can, or what kinds of apps and software can you download? Always going for the free open source. I don't advocate particularly for things you have to pay for, because the idea is to take advantage of what is already available. Think about the social media you have, think about the email, think about instant messaging programs, because all those things, you have to think about this. And as you're planning, think about these two questions I have in green. What do you have right now? So what do you have right now that you can start planning your courses with? And then think about what you can get in the immediate future. So here we're not thinking about what you can get in 6 months or in 1 year, or when I can start with, at that particular one, when I can finally start going to the malls. No. Things you can get right now, things you can find right now that you could add to your repertoire. And based on this, start tailoring your instructional practices and start getting ready for your situation. That brings us into the second part. All the instructional practices and resources that we can use. Here's the reality right now. We have so many options. So many options. It's hard to think. We have like, okay, what am I going to do in my class? Can I do the Moodle, Canvas, Brightspace, Zoom, Google Drive, Google Classroom, Teams, Meet, what's up? And then on the others I haven't even heard of. I mean, everybody talks about Zoom, everybody talks about Teams, everybody talks about Google Meet. I got my research team telling me, Raúl, Discord is the way to go. And I'm like, okay, if you say so. But how many people are familiar with Discord, for example? I mean, my students are gamers. They are familiar with that. And we're making some moves in that direction. But those are different situations. There are so many options to choose from that sometimes, and I feel like there is this thing that it's not even, I don't even know what to choose. It's like, oh, I have to use them all. I have to use them all. I feel like sometimes we're treating apps like we're treating Pokemon. Like, gotta catch them all. No, you don't gotta catch them all. You don't have to use all of these. You don't have to use all of these options. We have to be strategic about the options we have and the options we can play with. And I advocate, most importantly, I advocate for a very minimalist approach.
¿Qué, mi amor?
I tend to advocate for a minimalist approach. For me, when it comes to the technology and using resources, less is always more. And why do I say this? Because first of all, every tool you use has a learning curve. All the tools have learning curves, and there is an appropriation process that is part of it. It means you have to learn to use the machine. You have to learn to use the app. You have to learn to use the tool. You have to learn to use the cam. You have to learn to plug the equipment. All those little things. Where do I plug it? How do I plug it? When do I plug it? When do I turn it on? When do I turn it off? All those things are adding to the instructional repertoire. So we cannot disregard the learning curve. And that's why I start by saying, no, think of a minimalist approach to the instructional practice in virtual, digital, online, or hybrid learning. And second, focus on meaning making and learning. Think about the tools you need. Again, we can go back to the previous slide. I'm sorry. Think about all the options you have, but think about which ones maximize meaning making and which ones maximize learning. I recommend you to ignore the razzmatazz. This razzmatazz, the use of the gizmos and the apps, just because we have to use gizmos and apps. Oh, we all have to use Zoom. Right. Why do we all have to use Zoom? Oh, we all have to use Google Drive. Why do we all have to use Google Drive? We have to create wikis. Why do we all have to create wikis? The use of technology, even when you're making the move to the virtual, blended, digital environment, has to be reflexive. And always begin, there is a lot of learning that you can do with simple tools, and that can maximize interaction, and that can maximize the potential for learning. And you don't have to be so worried about, oh, I need to learn to use it, or I need to download 10 tutorials in order for me to really start getting the grasp of that particular tool. A minimalist approach when it comes to technology is helpful to all teachers because it's because it helps you focus on what you're supposed to be doing, teaching. You're supposed to be helping your students navigate content and navigate learning. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Let's focus on that. And that's why I suggest the minimalist approach. Also, mix it up. Don't rely on just one style. In your instructional practices, you want to mix it with synchronous and asynchronous. You want to mix online and offline, individual and group work. You want to mix activities to keep students engaged and avoid burnout. Too much emphasis on one kind of activity or too much emphasis on one kind of tool is going to lead to burning, especially now, especially when our students are already experiencing enormous amounts of Zoom fatigue and digital fatigue and online fatigue. So let's keep those. And also, when you are using resources, I say keep it honest. Keep in mind what you can do. Keep in mind what you're capable of doing in this particular time. And again, only experiment with things if you're already doing that. If you're already experimenting, if you're already experimenting with tools and you're experimenting with web page design, with video editing, then you continue down that road. If you're not doing a lot of experimentation, a little bit of simplicity, and just narrow it down and start. And then later, as you feel you have a better grasp of the kind of instruction or practice we're going to develop in the future, continue experimenting a lot more. And it's very important, this particular slide, it's very important. This is not the time to be isolated. This is I mean, sometimes in our educational system and even in our schools, we have a lot of silos. Like we have content area teachers and going in different directions. Departments don't speak to each other. Researchers sometimes are doing their own thing separately. And we have to start thinking that you're not just, I mean, in the case of school teachers, for example, you're not just planning one course per grade, you're planning multiple courses. And that those courses are part of a curriculum. And even at the university level, that we're not teaching just one course. That one course is part of a semester, of the semester curriculum. So your students at the university, they're not taking your class, they're taking 5, 6, 7 classes. When we were on campus, the silos worked because we had particular time slots, and those time slots we were working fine. But right now, time has become something a little more hazier, a little more diffuse, more abstract. So this is the time when we have to start engaging in a lot of coordination and communication, a lot of content area integration, thinking of activities and how you mix them up, so that students in one day don't have to spend 6 hours glued to the computer and the microphone in 6 hours of lectures, and the next day, now they have 12 hours of asynchronous reading activities that you have to go to every platform available. We need to balance it out, and we need to balance it out as a collective academic community. Otherwise, this is not going to be sustainable. So let's keep that in mind. Now, before you choose resources, and again, whether it is resources you already have available because your institution provides them, or because you're experimenting, because you have a little more freedom, or you don't know where to start, that situation is it's basically each of you will have to answer that particular question of where you stand when it comes to that. You have to start asking questions. First of all, why? Why am I using that resource? What is the reason behind the tool? The learning reason behind the tool. Then what am I going to do with that tool? What is the purpose of that tool? And does that tool provide an optimal learning experience? Then how? Then how are we going to use the resources? I mean, realize that sometimes we have a lot of apps and digital tools that are being underutilized. So let's use them to the maximum potential to maximize learning. So that's why I go for the minimalist approach. It's better to work with a smaller number of resources that you can maximize, as opposed to having all the resources available that we're just using a very surface level. And then when? Think about the time of the day of the week. I mean, some activities are better for the beginning of the day, some activities are better, or some resources are better for the end of the day, when your students may have a shorter attention span, or they might be so already burned out from sitting in front of a screen for the whole day. Always factor those things in mind as you're developing your activities. So let's begin. For example, we have video conferencing. There are options. This is a chart I found online. They talk about Zoom, Google Meet, and Teams, or Google Hangouts in Teams. I am not going to advertise one or the other. I believe that some institutions already are using Zoom. Some institutions have Teams. Some have the Google Suite that they use Google Meet. So I'm not gonna debate the qualities or the shortcomings of each of them. What I'm more interested in is why we use the video conferencing, first of all. So we want to do it so we can have a level of contact with students and being strategic about moments when you need to have discussion and explanation. So when you can do lectures and shorter lectures, when you can have some class discussions, guided class discussions, for example, using breakout rooms or responding to asynchronous activities. Keep your meetings at a short length when possible and always include a visual material. So just to make it, so you don't have to depend so much on people turning on and off their cameras. There is a tip that one of my researchers mentioned. So I wanted to bring it up because I thought it was a brilliant idea, and I think in general my researchers they're brilliant scholars. So I always like to give them credit where credit's due. And the suggestion is this: whenever possible, remember I mentioned the Ethernet. And we got somebody with a mic. Oh, yeah, there you go. So whenever possible, use Ethernet cable. So the Ethernet cable is the cable that the big cable sometimes is blue or yellow, and on the back of the router you have those they have the yellow slots. So insert it in your computer because that gives you more stability. So sometimes Wi-Fi can be really iffy, but if you connect to Ethernet, you're going to have a more stable connection. So I bring that as a pro tip because Carlos, my researcher, kind of mentioned that, like, yeah, people depend too much on Wi-Fi when they're doing video conferencing. They should just be using the LAN. It should be using the LAN connection. It's using the using Ethernet. So I bring that up here again because I told you my researchers, they're gamers, so I trust the gamers. They're always on top of technology. Google Drive is another very interesting, and for many teachers, if you have a Gmail account, you already have Google Drive yourself. And usually Google Drive, we tend to go with the bread and butter, which is docs, sheets, and slides. But if you think about, there are so many options. Some I hadn't even thought about until I started really thinking of this webinar, that there are all these options. You can use maps, you can create sites, you can use data, you can create whiteboards, you can edit pictures, you can do drawings. That Google Drive itself gives you so many possibilities for different kinds of documents different things you can do in class, that if you have if you need, and this is one of those, like, you need a quick and very reliable resource to develop a course, Google Drive is a very good alternative. And even for some people who might later go into other apps, it's not a bad training ground. So things you can do, for example, if you have materials on Google Drive, include focusing on online reading. And here I want to take a minute to talk a little bit about this, because what would a presentation of mine be if I don't bring about something related to literacy? It's very important to think that one of the major changes we're going to experience over the next few months is going to be how we deal with reading comprehension. There are major differences, and this is research-based. There are major differences in the way we read when we have paper and we read when we have screens. And there are very specific metacognitive strategies that correspond to digital and online reading. And there are very specific reading comprehension activities that you apply when you do online and digital reading comprehension. That, in fact, could be a whole webinar on its own. But things you can do when you're reading, well, you can do read and response. So you can have students actually reacting and writing short text on different outlets about what they read. They can have graphic organizers as ways to summarize what they read in class, and they can just do it by hand, and they can take a picture and send it to you. You can create discussion groups. You can have discussion groups using WhatsApp, for example, where you can have your students having specific groups to deal with reading comprehension. If you're on Zoom, then you can do breakout groups. Sticky notes, in the sense of sticky notes kind of like related to the comment tool. So the idea of I can use those commentary tools available to talk about the different readings I'm working on. And even Google Slides as an alternative that I can respond by making a presentation. By making a presentation about the stuff we are reading at the particular moment in time. So let me just quickly show you what some of those would look like. So this is a graphic. Some of the examples are from my own methods class. So a graphic organizer is, again, just because we are working on a digital environment doesn't mean everything has to be using the digital tools. Sometimes having your students work at home and work on a notebook and just draw with the traditional tools of pen and paper, and then take a picture. Something as people can call it primitive. Something as primitive is just taking a picture, sending it on WhatsApp. It works. Sometimes and again, the idea as you are moving into this digital, virtual, hybrid learning environments is always begin with a simpler approach to how you do things and start making it more complex as you have gained confidence and as you feel that the program is already developing. Sometimes starting with simple tools and gradually moving on to the more complex ones is a better approach than just going all in and then finding levels of frustration because it's not working. I also like the comment tool that you have, for example, in Google Documents, where you can have very quickly, you can create a form without a lot of technical elements. You can simply have the students comment here, and then you can have students respond to each other. If you ever do that, just remind the students never to click resolve, because if you click the resolve button, then the whole conversation is gone. That's kind of the only warning. But this is a possibility that is very low tech compared to other possibilities to create forms. For example, if you're using Moodle or Writespace or one of your more specialized platforms, this is a good way to get students engaged in conversation about a reading. And you can even do this on a PDF file. You can also use, you can highlight and comment on PDF files, so you can have your students respond directly to class readings that you put somewhere. When it comes to writing, I think for me, I find very useful the idea of engaging in collaborative writing, where you can have students doing reading and doing group writing, team writing, and in real time provide feedback to what they're talking about. Trying to find, I can't seem to find the person. Somebody has the microphone on, so.
Jason Palacios.
Yeah. I can't seem to find him here. Yeah, thank you for that. So a little bit of collaborative writing. So you can have your students work in a document at the same time from wherever they are. Journaling, I also find that very useful. Especially because as we are in this rush to go virtual, this is a good time to start reminding students that there are moments in this, and you have to create moments in instructional practices where we can go offline. Especially when it comes to the culture of writing, this is a very good time to cultivate spaces when you're doing all kinds of writing, drawing, however you can start by doing visualization and drawing at the lower levels and more elaborate writing and genre writing at the higher levels. That it's important to cultivate moments for offline work. And even in the way you conceive your instructional practices, even if it's a virtual course or it's a hybrid course, there should be moments where instructional practices and learning practices are offline. In that sense, returning to the idea of having a journal where students can write their thoughts and organize their thoughts in a piece of paper, it's very helpful. There is cognitive research that proves that the offline moments are very helpful in the development of writing skills. And if you have the possibility, to engage with social media as a form of microwriting. It's a nice way to get your students engaged using what they already use, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Haven't experimented with TikTok, but I'm very sure if you get your students involved, they'll be creative enough to find a way to use it as part of your classroom instructional practices, as ways to comment and respond to text. So I like to use sometimes this idea of the bulletin board. So I just create a Google document that is completely open for everybody, and everybody can start commenting. And I just leave it open for an X period of time. So people, as they can go and read and either make their own comments or respond to other comments, and just leave it for a particular period of time. It's also important, as we're planning all this, that we have to think about activities that can be short-term for one class, or things that we can develop over a month, or things that we can even develop over 6 months or the whole year. So mix it up in terms of the duration. Not every class activity I carry out in these environments needs to be finished at the end of the class period. Sometimes we can organize activities in a way that students can develop them at different intervals, and that way also lowering the existing amounts of stress over the completion of all the work. I also like to use tweeting. In my methods class at the university, we tweet a lot, and we actually have this particular hashtag, MATLUPB. For people, it's Methods and Approaches to Teaching All Languages at Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana. And this is how I keep track of all the class activities that we have done over the past few semesters. So occasionally I have students go and say, okay, you're gonna read this, and then you're gonna write 3 tweets responding to one question, or 1 tweet responding to a question, and then I mix it up in different ways. But this is a possibility where you can get students involved in social media and use social media for your benefit. I mean, from the research I do in literacy, we don't necessarily think that social media is the enemy. Social media can be a very powerful ally if we know how to weave it. Not make it the centerpiece of instructional practice, but use it as an ancillary tool to support the main instructional practices that are happening in your class. Well, some people might want to experiment with video making, and making videos is a lot of fun if you have a little bit of time and all the creativity in the world to do it. There are lots of online tools, and I'm not going to talk about the complicated ones, or the ones that need licenses. Or I have experimented with 5 minutes. Oh my God, 5 minutes? I think I got this. I have experimented with three of these: Adobe Spark, Bible, and FlexClip, and also with this idea of the Minimalist Multimodal Video. So these are videos I make just with a smartphone and whatever you have on your desk. So I'm going to show you. I'm going to skip, for the purpose of time, the video that I did with Adobe Spark, and I'm going to move into the Minimalist video.
This is Catalina, and she wants to learn English. These are some ideas she can use to do it. For example, you can...
So, 1 second, let's check, make sure.
Start by watching TV shows or movies in English with subtitles also in English. Or you can read simple literature in English, like comics.
Yeah, for some reason the video, something else had the technology, but this is a video that students made to talk about learning English. And it's a very short video. And as you can see in the video, all they used was one smartphone to record and everything they had. So they had notebooks, they used another one to illustrate that you can watch movies, and even their fingers. So that's what I call a minimalist multimodal video. It's one that doesn't require a lot of resources. It's just what you have available. And that's the main idea of these instructional practices. We want to do and engage in instructional practices with what we have. and use it efficiently. Just because we're almost wrapping up. Yeah, I think we're almost wrapping up. I started compiling a list of resources because I heard questions from the last webinar about possible resources. So when I took on the challenge of, I started looking for that. So I created an incomplete list, of websites that are made for teachers and by teachers, where you can find different lesson plans and activities in English. I already have some in this URL. So if you go to bit.ly/ASOCOPI resources, you're gonna find it. And the idea that these resources are gonna be curated. It means that I am openly inviting all the presenters in the previous webinar and the incoming webinars to go to this website and help me curate resources. And I want to emphasize the curate because that is a very important element right now. Right now, in the middle of the pandemic, we all want solutions. I mean, I do too. But sometimes if we're not careful, we might end up immersed in the middle of spam or in the middle of bad quality resources. So the idea is, and this is something, again, I'm pushing here, the webinar presenters in the series, and I'm pushing ASOCOPI to go in this direction, that we curate resources that we can share with, and that the teachers have available, and you can say, yeah, this is good stuff. It's good stuff because there are researchers, there are high quality teachers behind this, and not because I just found it on Google. That we can use our criteria to do this little protocol curation of the resources. So when our teachers, the people who go to this webinar, go online, they can see quality stuff. That's our responsibility as a professional association, and those of us who are doing research in the field of language education. That's one of our responsibilities. How we curate this information that is at the disposal of our communities. And with that, I think I used up the 5 minutes I got the 5 minute warning. So before we go into the little time we may have left for questions, just thank you all for being so attentive to this webinar. Anybody who wants to learn a little bit more about the kind of work that my students and I are doing at the Literacy Second Language Project, you're welcome to just check our website, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram, and just drop us an email. If you drop us an email, we'll be happy to discuss with you things that are related to this webinar and may go beyond this webinar. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing for a bit. And I am going to open the floor. Jair, if you want to moderate the Q&A, I'll be more than happy just to wait here for the questions.
Yep, no problem. I have been checking here the chat and I haven't read any question. Maybe if people want to ask questions directly to Raúl. Yes, can you hear me? Yes, can you hear me?
Jair seems to be absent. So if anybody has any question, you're very welcome to either put them on the chat. Probably I think might be easier.
Raúl, can you listen?
And you can just type the question on the chat. I'll be reading it. That will be probably much easier than trying to find or.
Raúl, can you listen?
So.
Can you listen, Raúl?
Okay.
Now, I think.
Yeah. So
okay.
I think it probably was mine.
Yes. Okay. Yes. No, I was saying that I didn't read any question in the chat. So I guess people want to talk to you, so they may address you directly.
Oh, absolutely. And again,
so just raise your hands and then
people raise their hand. Let's quickly.
Carlos
and Giancarlo. Carlos, you can go first.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raúl, for the presentation. My question has to do with a good teaching sequence for teaching English online through video calls. What would you recommend, or what's your viewpoint on a good teaching sequence for online classes? Thank you.
What a good teaching sequence for. All right, can you tell me a little bit more what's on your mind so we can maybe figure this out together? What do you mean by sequence?
Yes, it has to do with the series of steps that teachers follow when they start when they engage in a video call with students. They usually ask questions related to what should be the type of sequence or the goals of the activities that they should follow with the online session. For example, if they have a 30-minute or 40-minute session with students, what type of activities they should propose in order to deliver properly or take advantage of the time that they have online with students.
Okay, well, I mean, I think the first thing right there has to do with the level. So, I would say, first of all, you have to gauge the level. Again, out for the idea of the triage. So, if you have beginners, you might, the sequence is going to require more structure and more specific instruction. As the students become more advanced, I think you can always do things a little more organically, and also as students gain proficiency, they gain competence in the language, there can also be a level of negotiation about how we go and how you organize this. So it's all contingent on the level. I mean, if you have beginner students at the beginning level, so it's important to have a very clear. You should come up with a work plan of what's going to happen. Like what are moments we're going to have whole group, and if you're doing video conferencing in a group. Like it's not like a mid-size. If it's a mid-size group, let's say 6-7 students, there is a very good tool. Zoom, for example, provides, and I think the others may as well. That is the breakout room. So you can divide the students in 2 groups or 3 groups and have them develop a particular task, and you can be checking in and out as they go into their activity. So that. Keeping in mind the level of the students and also the level of comfort with technology. So before you even begin to plan the sequence, you want to first assess where they are linguistically and where they are with the comfort with technology. And once you have an assessment of that situation, you can start thinking of those moments where we can come together as a group. You can come to those moments when you are working individually, and you can also use those moments for, especially when you have students that are a little more advanced, moments where they can use video tools as ways to respond. So making video responses, and you can say like, okay, we're gonna make a video response, you're gonna make a video, and students are gonna make videos responding to the video. Because sometimes, even in an online situation, not everybody has the time to talk. John, you raised your hand.
Actually, I think that was Jan. Now it's Carlos Ivan's
Okay.
turn.
It doesn't matter who goes first. So
okay.
Who is next?
No, I guess he just he doesn't have any question any longer, I guess.
Okay. All right.
All righty. If there is anybody else who's got a question, please just raise your hand and you have the turn to ask.
Please.
As I said, I guess you already answered the questions during your presentation, so which is usually what happens in this type of So thank you very much for your time, Raúl. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. And of course, you already have Raúl's email and information. You can, of course,
absolutely,
just email him, get in touch with him, and of course, if you have any questions in regards, so please just more than welcome. And of course, you were invited by him to get in touch with him. So thank you very much.
I think there's one question here, so I want to. Okay. There's a question here. Certainly privately, but I want to respond to the question before we go.
Please do.
The question: what things do you recommend to do with students to keep them involved in English? The answer is whatever you. The simple answer, the TLDR, is whatever you can. And right now, what we have to do is find what as we are developing the virtual and digital spaces, let's also think about things you can leave for them. Because we have to think that if we have these digital spaces, we have these online repositories in the platforms, you can think about the things you can do with them. and always leave them something extra for practice. I always, when I teach my methods class, I probably provide 3 or 4 times as much content as the one I actually cover. And I always give them, that's for you. So all the input you can provide, it's very helpful. And once you're with them, then maximize the possibilities for them to interact, maximize the possibilities for them to talk, maximize the possibilities for them to get engaged with the language. That'll be the answer to that particular question. And for everybody who was part of this, I've been reading some of the comments. I'm very grateful to all of you for the response I had, the reactions that you had to the webinar. This is part of building community, and I really, quick question, Jacqueline, how can we improve the students' learning network area with no technology? I'll answer that question quickly. I said part of it it's something that goes beyond the webinar. Now, but what we have to do in the case of the rural areas is we have to come together. And this is not something we can leave those teachers to their own devices. This is going to require a much larger effort where we can coordinate with like secretaries of education, the Ministry of Education, so that we can help, for example, radio access, TV access, local newspaper access to have content that we can deliver. So as we are already rethinking how we can use radio and the public channels for that, there has to be a moment where those radio stations and those TV programs have to come back to us, the language teachers, the schools of education, the research groups, ASOCOPI, so we can guide them. So helping the rural areas is not something that we can just leave to teachers alone. That is a much, much larger. Now, in the small scale is make sure and reach out to people so we can share materials that we can quickly deliver to you, and you can use them with your students. But again, I insist, the rural support is a incredibly much larger effort than whatever I can give in a 1-hour webinar. That is a larger question that we have to sit down and think, beginning with the professional associations in Colombia, how we're going to address that problem. And with that, thank you all very much.
I'm sorry, I guess there is another question.
Yeah.
Someone wants to ask you.
Questions.
I think it is Alberto. If you want to, please go ahead, no problem.
It's always time for
Hello,
questions.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, sir. Very good.
Yes, wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you, Raúl, for this wonderful presentation. I think that many of us were like really hoping to hear someone to discuss this type of issues that we're dealing with these days. And well, my question has to do with learners.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, we have different types of learners, face-to-face and also in this remote learning environment.
Yeah.
And we have been told many times that these learners we're dealing with are digital natives.
Oh, no.
But we have realized that
it's
not like that.
Oh, no.
We have noticed that, well, some of them might be, but very few of them, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some others that are lagging behind, and there are some others who are just trying to cope with, and there are some others that are struggling with with the use of many tools and learning at the same time.
Yeah.
And there are some others that are just like pretty much like you, like us, like the teacher, you know. While some of them are, you know, like teaching you things, how to do, how to find things and how to handle things. There are some others who are asking you or begging you how to do things around.
Right.
So my question would be, like, from your point of view, from your expertise, what would be the best way to handle this?
Well, actually, the best way to handle this, well, first of all, is by putting to rest any debates about digital natives and digital immigrants. I mean, that would be the starting point. That debate, we have to put it to rest. That debate has done more harm than good, has caused a lot of disservice to teachers, has caused a lot of disservice to students. And we have taken too many things for granted in learning and teaching practices that now some of them are actually now coming home to roost. So that was the first thing. First thing is move on. Second, I think the very answer to your question lies down in the triage. I think if one of the things, I didn't mention the presentation, but the triage is something that we have, the triage, we have to do it with teachers, but we also have to do it with students. We also have to do it with students. We haven't, again, we're in that assumption of the digital native, whatever that means. We haven't really thought the time to think there are students who don't have the fundamentals of the foundational literacies to do digital stuff. There are students who lack the foundational literacies to do the digital stuff. And to play with the digital tools efficiently, there are some foundational elements. There is a lot of research that actually proves that particular point. So my suggestion would be, as you're thinking of planning your class, also triage, as you triage yourself, as you triage your institutions and you triage your curricula, triage your students. Where in that little chart, and let me see if I can go back and find that little chart quickly. Let me see if I can find it. It's somewhere here. Yeah. So somewhere in that chart that we talked about, so when I say you, this you refers to everybody. It refers to teachers, refers to schools, refers to the curriculum, but it refers to students. What are students here? Especially in terms of tech savvy. Don't assume that your students are all blue dots just because they're quote unquote digital natives. Or don't assume that you have adults or older learners, they're black dots just because they're older. Triage the situation, assess and ask them exactly what they know. And as you ask them what they know, it's a lot easier to determine instructional practices, again, and determine which students can be more independent and be more creative and give them the creativity. And then you can devote more time and resources without neglecting the first group to the ones who may be not as media savvy, not as tech savvy, or who are lacking some of those fundamentals to start playing more and more in the digital environments.
Righty. So once again, thank you very much, Raúl, for your presentation. And of course, super meaningful for all of us. Everybody here in the chat is agreeing with your viewpoints and also with the contribution that you made here today for us as in this job that we have, that we I guess we were not all prepared for this. So once again, thank you for your presentation. Thank you all for participating. And as I said in the chat, I will see you all next week. Our next guest is Dr. Isabel Tejada. She's gonna do the third part of these webinars. So for more information, please visit our website on the one hand, and also we're going to email you all the information in regards to our next webinars. Thank you very much, Raúl. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Same for everybody. And that's what I like to always end my video conferences with my students. I like to tell everybody, stay safe, stay connected, stay together.
Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon to you all.